Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the series Coming Together, a collaboration between Living It Up in Lion City and Whitehatters.sg, a local NGO that seeks to have conversations with both Singaporeans and foreigners and facilitate dialogue over social norms and sometimes controversial topics. Thank you for joining us again. I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode where we talked about cultural integration and what it actually meant. I really hope that you found some value in it, and I'm really looking forward to feedback if you have any. Now, the topic for today's episode is an interesting one, and it's based on a lot of online sentiments that we see and that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. It's about the Singaporean identity, and more specifically, it's about what makes a Singaporean true blue and what makes a Singaporean new. Now, to get this conversation started, we have with us here a friend and fellow podcaster who will be giving us a little more insight into the topic of Singaporean identity. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Danny Koordi.
Hi Rindo. Thanks for having me.
How are you, man?
Good. Yeah.
So, Danny, before we get started, maybe you could tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess the main reason why I'm on this show today is because my background is actually I was born and raised in Singapore, but for I think only up until last year I was a PR, so Indonesian citizenship, and that was because when I was born my parents weren't Singaporean at the time, so I was given a PR status. But they were PR already, so I was given PR status. But I didn't only convert into a full Singaporean citizenship until only recently. So this issue of Singaporean identity is something that has always been looming in the back of my mind, like the issue of like the third culture kid and stuff like that, and like, are you really Singaporean if you don't have the passport and stuff like that? So yeah, that's but that aside, what I do is that I am actually a full-time I'm working full-time in podcasting. I used to be in a very different field in auditing, but I made the transition. It's been quite a journey, but I have a full-time job in podcasting. I am not going to share who my employers are, but I am going to make the disclaimer that whatever views I represent here are not representative of my employers or any business partners or whoever that I associate with. These are all my own views. Yeah.
Thanks for that lengthy disclaimer, Danny.
Yes.
Fun fact, folks, Danny was also the guy who introduced me to the local podcasting community.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been a really interesting couple of years because of that. So thanks, Danny.
Yeah.
So Danny, about your origin story, if you will. So you did mention that you were born in Singapore.
Yeah.
Right. So you've lived all your life here in Singapore.
Yes.
And essentially went through everything that the regular Singaporean does.
Yeah.
Right. I have to ask, in your early years, have you ever felt that there was a difference? Or were you conscious of the fact that you weren't Singaporean?
I would say, personally speaking, yes. And that is because most of my family is actually based in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
That's on my dad's side. And my mom's side, most of them are in China.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, holidays were always shuttling back and forth between either Indonesia or China. So like every year, at least once a year, we'll go back for Chinese New Year or something to Indonesia to visit with like the larger family, right? And then the main thing, at least for me, and why I didn't feel at the time neither here or there, was that when I went to Indonesia and I played with my cousins and everything, they'd be like, oh, you're a Singapore boy, your bahasa is so bad and stuff like that, So it's like I feel a little bit out of place and didn't really feel like Indonesian.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I am in Singapore, I guess this is something that I've always had to deal with, and I'm not saying this to make it like a big issue. It's just something that I've noticed is that Singaporeans, or I guess locals here, are very perceptive about like people's names. So, for example, when I when I get a Grab, right, and then I get into the car, and then they say, "Hey, are you Danny?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And then after that, like 80% of my taxi and Grab rides, if they are able to see what my name is, right, they'll be like, "Oh, are you Indonesian?" They'll be like, "Oh, yeah, 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 yeah." Because of my name. My full name is Danny Koordi, which is not very not a very common Singaporean name, I guess. Like, for example, if your name was like Aaron Tan or like something like that, very very I would say not too out of the blue, then no one will question. But then uh because my name is not that common as it seems, people tend to like ask me, are you local, are you this, are you whatever, and most of the time it's, are you Indonesian? So again, Indonesia, I didn't really feel that Indonesian. Then Singaporean, because of this one aspect, I would say I didn't really feel like wholly Singaporean lah. But I think aside from that, pretty much comfortable with Singapore, with viewing myself or identifying myself as a Singaporean. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so there's one thing I love about cab uncles is that, and like I recognize this all the time when I take cab rides. It's like I'm pretty sure that they're bored out of their minds, and they will grasp at any straw, to have a conversation. And I love that. I'm generally a chatty person, so I'd be like, yeah, let's keep going, right? So we keep talking and stuff. So I kind of get that. But at the same time, you are right. Sometimes if a name stands out, I think people are curious about origins and.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not like very, how to say, like fussed about it. I don't really mind it too much. I mean, people are just curious, sure, they'll ask.
Yeah.
But I can see how maybe to other people, and maybe when it's not just a name, maybe when it's like skin color or something, then it might be very grating, or it might be like, over the top, or it might be becoming a bit of an issue lah. Yeah, to foreigners and stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
So, in all your time living here, and once again, born here, raised here, for all intents and purposes, you are Singaporean, right?
Yeah.
Did national service too?
Yes,
So,
yes.
I think that should lay to rest any conversations about
public schooling all the way, national service. I have served my dues. I am going through reservice. Yeah.
So I'm really curious about the nature of the commentary on, true blue Singaporeans versus new Singaporeans, especially in recent years. So in your opinion, Danny, have you been seeing a rise of this kind of dialogue, or has it always been there in all your time here?
I think for me personally, it's definitely been something that is becoming more of an issue, especially with social media. Of course, these conversations might have been going on like when I was younger or something, but maybe it's just more prevalent or more easily visible now.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The amplification of social media through social media can't be discounted when it comes to these things. And, I think outrage porn is kind of the thing that spreads the fastest, right? So
if you can find a community to love stuff about, you can find a community to hate stuff together about as well, right?
Precisely. I'm gonna start quoting on this time. And honestly, and since you mentioned this, right?
Does that make me sound like a bigot apologist?
I'd say a realist, because I think that is that is the reality of the world that we're living in. And since you mentioned this, right, I just started thinking about it right now. In that, I guess I didn't see a lot of this until recently, mostly because I wasn't tuned in.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this before, where it's like, I think the first years of your life living in a new country is all about finding your bearings.
Yeah.
And so you tend to not dive deep into, underlying social sentiment until much later. And I think that's what I'm seeing too. So now I'm kind of wondering if the sentiment has already existed for the longest time and I haven't tapped into it. And the reason I'm confused about this is because I tried doing like those Google trend searches, and tried looking for, keywords before 2010, before 2005, about, true blue Singaporeans. And I've noticed this thing where at the time, at least between 2005 and 2010,
Yeah.
any Google search about True Blue Singaporeans at the time was mostly about like these listicle like articles, which is how True Blue Singaporean are you?
Right, right,
Like,
right, right.
have you tried this food or do you remember VR Man?
Right, right,
Stuff
right,
like that,
right.
right? And then I think there was a perceptible shift after 2010 when it became more about True Blue Singaporeans are losing out versus new and naturalized citizens who are kind of, taking over.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts about this?
Uh, I think first and foremost, it should be stated that this is a very complex and complicated issues, and I by no means claim to know like the answer, but I can only share my own perspective or what I believe is happening lah. So, with regards to, I would say um, the weaponization of the use of like true blue Singaporeans as a way to like vilify foreign nationals, let's say. I think maybe this would be like almost like a perfect storm of like I would say economic and social political issues happening in and around Singapore. So of course, pre 2010 or I would say mid to late 2000s, the economy was going well up until like you have the great financial crisis, right? In 2008, 2009, and then economy was shit for like quite a number of years, and Singapore took a while to recover. So of course, because of that, many locals became very concerned about like economic prospects, their careers, their jobs. And then so when you have that kind of hotbed already, and then you add in like, maybe there's like news reports of like what CEO is coming buying up property in Singapore, or this rich person is being naturalized in Singapore because he's building a business here or something. It's from my perspective, it's like almost understandable that this kind of sentiment can come up, because it's like to them it's like they're already finding it so difficult to survive and to get food on the table for themselves in their own country, and yet here is some like stranger from a different land just seemingly paying his way into the country lah. Yeah, so of course I so I guess it'll be a lot more understandable as to why those kind of sentiments come up. And the CEOs are just a big example. There are of course like many more examples of like say your executives going into like your director positions or whatnot, manager positions or whatnot. And this is not just happening in like the top level. It's like all across like maybe MNCs and stuff like that. So I would say this is one of the bigger contributors. At least to me, this seems to be one of the bigger contributors to like the negative sentiment, is that now they're facing a lot more competition. Yeah.
So I'd like to unpack that a
Mm,
little.
mm.
So what I know that there's credence to the idea of folks coming in, and it's essentially a manifestation of eat the rich syndrome, right? It's like rich people are getting away while we're struggling, But I think there's also other aspects to it, which is about cultural dilution, and
Mm.
I think these are real problems. They may not be logical ones, but these are emotional, and I think every government has to be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
So to go back to the topic of new Singaporeans versus true blue Singaporeans, there is a cultural boundary that is being defined by popular discourse, right? Like people decide who gets to be true blue Singaporean, who
Yeah.
gets to be new Singaporean.
Yeah.
Like based on having lived here all your life,
Yeah.
what would you consider true blue, and what would you consider new?
Okay, so I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I would say Singapore is actually pretty unique in that, at least from a true blues or from a local's perspective, there are many identifiable aspects of what makes a Singaporean a Singaporean. So, you have things like, appreciating the local culture. Maybe you grew up watching like local TV shows, Channel 8, Channel 5, what have you. You grew up watching, your favorite sitcoms like Phua Chu Kang, Under One Roof, all these kind of things. You are familiar with like the local food. You have like a favorite place for like chicken rice, for you know about like your favorite laksa spot, all these kinds of things. And then, of course, you're familiar with like the lingo here, your CPF, ERP, what have you, all the various all the various ways we use language to communicate here, Singlish, whatnot, all the all the abbreviations that we use and everything. And then for boys, if you go through for men, sorry, if you go through army, then yeah, that would be a pretty big signal that you are Singaporean. And the reason why I say that Singapore is actually pretty unique, because when you think about it, for example, in America, what can you say is like truly what makes an American truly an American? Right? There are some things that maybe you can point out. Like, for example, you have the stereotype of like the gun toting cowboy hat wearing
Yeah.
cowboy. Yeah, that's pretty American. But
Yeah.
it's a stereotype, right? That's
Yeah.
not reality. Right? For example, New Yorkers don't act like that. I don't even think people in Texas dress and act like that. Right? This is like a very outdated view of what America is. In fact, modern day America, and especially in a place like New York, where for the longest time, forever, people have said it's like how to say, like a mixing pot, like a cultural mixing pot, like all various different cultures are part of New York. There is no one single, or at least it's very hard to point out like identifiable cultural aspects that makes say a New Yorker or an American, because there's been so much freaking cultural dilution that basically anyone who lives there is a New Yorker or American at that point. Because like you think about it, there's like there are like Chinese people in Chinatown in New York City. There are like Koreans. There's like the Jewish people. There's like black people as well. So it's like all sorts of different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and it mixes and dilutes so much such that there's no one single thing to point to say that, oh, okay, you are that's what makes you American. I find that so fascinating. And to come back to Singapore now, I think we are slowly heading towards that direction, but at least for now, our cultural roots, or at least these cultural markers that I've listed out earlier, that what makes a Singaporean, are still very much established. And it will take a while to change. But then with the world, continually becoming more and more cosmopolitan, cultures and whatnot, and media becoming more and more accessible, I think it's safe to say that maybe, I don't know, like 30, 40 years down the line, maybe some of these cultural aspects might slowly start to dissolve away, and maybe what Singapore will turn to is like a very humid version of New York.
No, that's a really interesting viewpoint. I want to ask Danny, like, okay, I'm gonna put this out there. Is there a need for a cultural requirement to be Singaporean?
What do you mean by like cultural requirement? Do you mean by
So,
accepted like by the government, or is it accepted by like the locals here?
yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at, because at least from my understanding, so
Mm-hmm.
generally paths to citizenship are often based on a set of rules, defined by government. It includes a lot of period of stay, economic contribution by way of taxes or any other means, some sort of ties to local society, language requirements in a lot of places like France and Germany.
Yeah.
And of course, academic qualifications and potential contribution to the betterment of that society.
Yeah.
So these are kind of like well-established, requirements that a lot of governments across the world tend to adopt when it comes to evaluating a person's, eligibility to be Singaporean.
Yeah.
To be a citizen of that country. And the same thing applies in Singapore too, I dare say, although the process is not as transparent and we're not particularly sure what the criteria are. Having said this, I think in popular discourse, there seems to be a strong demand to appreciate, accept, and assimilate into local norms, which are probably softer concerns than the more government mandated requirements.
Yeah.
So, does citizenship entail having to, for the lack of a better word, pander to local folks who demand assimilation?
Okay, this is a really tricky question because I'm not sure of the answer myself. Because from the viewpoint of, say, like a local, say, like you live with your family in a HDB neighbor, and then you have a neighbor coming in, is a new Singaporean, right? Naturalized Singaporean, who's only been around for a few years, but then is able to purchase a HDB and already and whatnot. So but then he's able to reap all these benefits, but at the same time he doesn't he only eats like the fanciest I guess French restaurants. He doesn't eat any local hawker food. Doesn't speak like Singlish. He's very much like trying to maintain his own culture of the past. So from this perspective, it's like, I guess from that local's perspective, it's like, okay, our country has so graciously accepted you in terms of like the citizenship, and we have, upon the citizenship, conferred you all these rights and embellishments, right, that come along with it. You could at the very least do is try to show that you belong, lah. Yeah, so that's where I think that kind of sentiment comes in. But at the same time, thinking about it, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's like yeah, it's your neighbor, but why should they behave? Why should you want them to behave a certain way, right? It's like I don't know, man. To me, it's like I'm of the belief that people should just mind their own business as long as they're not encroaching upon another person's property, or they're not like causing you any trouble or any issues, right? Why should you bother about them, right? So for example, if that neighbor, say he's like a French dude, right, but naturalized, born French but a naturalized Singaporean, bought a HDB, he's living there. If he's just minding his own business, not causing any issues, not causing any fuss, he's just doing the same as you are, trying to like work to provide for his family, raise a family, and stuff like that, have a career and stuff like that. Why should you bother? Why should you care whether he eats laksa or eats only escargot or whatnot, right? Me, it doesn't. I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky thing. Yeah.
So I've been trying to understand like the nature of this kind of thing. And look, I know this is not a uniquely Singaporean thing, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's a lot of concerns that a lot of locals have, especially around the presence of privileged foreigners, right? So there's one thing about finding affirmation in one's own culture and customs when a foreigner appreciates it. So there's always that need, right? So it's like if who was that? So there was maybe a recent example, like what's that? There's a talk show guy, Jimmy Kimmel, I think.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Kimmel recently, pulled out a record, so it's a label of Young Raja.
Yeah.
And Singaporean internet went wild.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It was like, holy shit, Jimmy Kimmel. Like even
Yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel haters are like, yo, we made it there. So I think
But he was making fun of that song, right?
He was. But as it turns out, I listened to a recent podcast where Young Raja showed up on the Yalla Butt podcast.
Yeah.
And Young Raja mentioned that right after that, Jimmy Kimmel's team, reached out to him and said that, hey, man, we love the song. We were using this, purely for entertainment purposes. But just want to say that, it's a great song and stuff.
Yeah.
So that got him a lot of traction and stuff.
Yeah.
And the reality is that regardless of, that song being made fun of, at least
I
in
mean,
public,
it was like it wasn't like mean-spirited.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think the nature of the song also lends to that humor, right? It's just mommy.
Yeah.
But like having said this, right, just having that up there on a public stage that's not Singaporean gets a lot of people feeling, proud of the fact that we've made it there, right? So when a foreigner were to come into Singapore and show overt appreciation for culture and customs, there's a lot of pride that locals get. On the flip side, if foreigners show no intention of doing any of those things, that pride is poked. At least that's what I'm sensing. And then these conversations about, do foreigners deserve to be here? Is this Singaporean really Singaporean, or is he just here for tax reasons, etc., etc.? So is there an underlying dent to pride that's driving all of these conversations?
Okay. Before we get into that a little bit deeper, I just want to mention that when you said how when a foreigner brings up how great Singapore is, I'm thinking of the counterpoint of like Nas Daily when
Right.
he came to Singapore, and of course like a bunch of Singaporeans loved it, sure, but there was also the other side was like, who the hell is this guy? And why does he get like a 1 minute to do a 1 minute show with like Lee Kuan Yew? Sorry, Lee Hsien Loong.
Yeah.
What the hell is this?
Yeah.
What nefarious agenda is going on behind the scenes? And it turns out there was. I mean, I'm not going to like conspiracy theory here, but Nas did set up something here in Singapore. So
Yeah.
ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even call it conspiracy theory even, because like, and this is my understanding of it. So,
Yeah.
to do a quick sidetrack into like the story of Nas Daily and why he became from the most beloved content creator to the most hated.
Yeah.
So I think this is the story, and I think I have a timeline here somewhere. So, Nas Daily, at the time, he was doing all those 1 minute videos. Everybody loved him.
Yeah.
So he would go to different countries and people would come in crowds and stuff. A lot of my friends went the first time he came to Singapore when, he showed up outside, I think, NUS.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that Nas Daily came to Singapore. Everybody went wild. They're like, we want to be part of that positivity. He's a change from all the cynical, content creators and stuff. And then some folks online were like, wait a minute, there's like at least 500 people in this crowd. Was a permit applied? And this wasn't in malicious intent. This is just people genuinely being curious, from what I got in the comments. And then Nas Daily was like, oh, I had no idea. And then he came the second time. This time he got a big venue. I think it was Big Box at Buena Vista or something. And it was done very quickly. And then somebody piped up saying that, wait a minute, at Big Box, we apply for permits like months in advance. We hardly ever get it. How did this guy get it? So, the tone was kind of shifting, right?
What is up with these snitches, man?
Yeah. But at the same time, like, it kind of showed that, if you're a celebrity, things, the wheels are greased easier, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, Nas Daily then created a video called... this is what Singaporeans really live like, which was kind of well received, because he brought up the whole thing about, we all think that Singapore is like Crazy Rich Asians because we saw the movie, but this is what they really look like. This is the average income, regular house and stuff. It was quite well received, and I thought it was fairly well balanced, right? In his own exaggerated way. And then in between the second and third time, then we started seeing videos from NTUC Income. And it had like Nas Daily signature style. So there were like a couple of videos that started popping up on social media. So I remember like, my girlfriend at the time and I were like, what? There's a pattern here. And then afterwards, I think in the third NTUC Income video, his face shows up. So we're like, okay, so Nas Daily is actually behind these videos, and NTUC is paying him because he's a social media influencer.
Right.
Well and good.
Right.
Third video drops. And then in a batik shirt, Lee Hsien Loong comes in. And then everybody's like, wait a minute.
The cameo of all cameos, right?
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure that Lee Hsien Loong's rationale is that, let's try to, be more appealing to the public by working with and collaborating with social media influencers. And then I think right after that was when Nas Daily said that, oh, I'm done with this 1 minute a day project. I'm now moving to Singapore. And literally a week later, he's here. He sets it up. He does this whole video about his fancy, digs and stuff. And I think that's when people really started going like, what the man?
Rindo said it, guys, not me.
And I'm quoting the general sentiment on social media.
Rindo's laying out the facts, guys.
Yeah. And then I think a month later, and then this is what really solidified the hate, in my opinion, was that he put out an ad asking for... Vietnamese folks, where he will be, bringing them into his company to work for Vietnamese content and stuff. And then he said something like, just, fly over, we'll get everything done. This was around the time of, conversations about presence of, foreigners in numbers and stuff. And so everybody's like, wait a minute. Lee Hsien Loong is giving him all of the privileges to come here and set up his shop.
Yeah.
He's getting essentially a red carpet welcome. And and then now he's, bringing foreigners in to do his job. So he then had to clarify, saying that no, it's about traineeship, But I think then I think it just became quite clear for a lot of folks that Nas Daily was essentially given a lot of the advantages that people suspected the government was giving to foreigners.
Yeah.
It really fed into that narrative.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the timeline, the way I see it about Nas Daily's perceptions in Singapore. So yeah, no, but I mean, to go back to what you said about foreigners being, praising Singapore to the sky. Yes, of course, I'm sure that there's a lot of, locals who are like, wait, we find that weird. We find that almost insulting because foreigners are somehow more privileged than we are, and therefore you're now talking about this, right? But at the same time, there's always like a need for that, right? I think a recent example was this lady from England who's lived here for long enough. I think she's been living here since she was 6. And even though she's British, she got really famous on TikTok for, speaking Singlish and using like, Singlish phrases and stuff.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people loved her because they were like, oh, look at this foreigner imbibing our culture, celebrating it. And so I think the response to her was very different from the response to Nas Daily.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in your opinion, do you feel like the response to Nas Daily the norm or the exception?
It's very difficult to say one or the other because there's a lot of different things going on there as well. So I think generally speaking, especially on social media, you do get a bit envious or you do get a bit like salty or negative when you see someone boasting about how successful they are, right? So then that's one aspect of it. And then combine that with the aspect of he's a foreigner, suddenly getting all the benefits, all this like the red carpet treatment, let's say. And now he's become an easy target lah. Yeah, in that sense. So I think that situation basically that's where, or that's the nature of where the sentiment comes from. Yeah, it's more of like the issue with the people making the comments rather than like Nas Daily himself, right? Because the thing is, I'm pretty sure that like, for example, if you're like a successful entrepreneur in Singapore, you're a millionaire or whatever, you wouldn't be complaining about seeing someone else successful because there's not much to be envious about, right? But of course, I could be wrong. Yeah. But then in the case of like, for example, if it's just a influencer like harmlessly, having a bit of fun with our local culture, there's nothing really there to be, I guess, to get angry or pissed off or ticked off about. Yeah, if it's just purely for entertainment, I think they're just fine. So I think that's like the difference between the two cases. It's not really one is like the exception or the norm. It's more of like both are couched in different contexts, let's say. Yeah.
That's actually a fair point. I guess my mistake is to just club all of them together and see why is there hypocrisy, But okay, clearly, no, you're right. I think it's very much dependent on context.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So for instance, right? I have a bunch of friends and people that I know who, on surface, may not seem like they are local, right? Be it skin color, name, what have you. But then some of them clearly have been around for very long already, go through our education system and whatnot. And then I don't see them any different as like any other Singaporean, right? But maybe, for example, if this other person I knew was like, boasting about his big yacht in like Marina Cove and stuff like that, talking about how easy it is to get grants, then I might start to get a little suspicious, like, hey, wait a minute. I might start to make a few calls to the government agency. Did you apply for that permit and stuff, Maybe I might start to think about that. But then again, there's different contexts. Different things that go into these sort of things, yeah.
So, to talk a little bit about, being accepted here, as long as you're not being a dick, as long as you're not rubbing your wealth in people's faces or on social media, you can be kind of, you know, I mean, like you're essentially invisible to the local
Yeah,
discourse,
I
right?
would say pretty much if you are not rubbing people the wrong way here, um, people, I guess most of the general population generally don't mind you living here. Yeah, and then if you take the extra effort to sort of like take in the local culture, they might actually endear themselves to you because they're
Okay,
like, hey, look at this cute foreigner doing our local
okay, okay,
Singapore stuff. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. There's a bit of like a weird thing going on there, but that's I think the sentiment that I sort of get lah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So on that topic, I really want to get into this since you mentioned this, right? So
yeah.
if you are a naturalized Singaporean, and if you are, seen to be celebrating local culture, or if you're contributing, in
Mm.
whatever way you can, you will be accepted. Now, I want to bring up a very specific example.
Mm.
And this is with regards to the recent conversations about, free trade agreements in Singapore,
Mm.
and whether they are beneficial to the country, and very specifically this free trade agreement between India and Singapore. So the nominated member of parliament, Leong Mun Wai, consistently brings this up, and he consistently brings up the failures of the CECA, and he constantly cites the example of the local bank DBS having a CEO, Piyush Gupta, um, who is a naturalized citizen.
Yeah.
But Leong Mun Wai's arguments are always around the he's I think he's always asking, why is it that true blue Singaporeans are not getting these high level jobs? Now, to go back to what you said about, as long as a citizen is, contributing and somehow, being a beneficial force to the community, that should be okay.
Mm.
But we should also accept that these voices exist,
Mm.
and these are loud ones.
Mm.
So, what are your thoughts on, very specifically, Leong Mun Wai's sentiments about true blue versus new Singaporeans, and people of his uh, disposition?
Okay, so two things, and again, this is just my opinion here. I think where Leong Mun Wai is coming from is from a sort of like almost purely political basis. He's saying these things, he's making these points so as to appeal to his base or to his voters or to his, council or whatever, right? Because I think in his view, like his followers or his constituency, they're made up of people who have issue with like foreigners taking up executive positions in Singapore. So that's why he's making those comments. That's, at least to me, that's why he's making those comments. But then from the DBS perspective, you have to understand that I highly doubt that the reason why they have they sort of like filled the role the way they did is like at at least from DBS perspective, I think it is purely a business decision.
Mm-hmm.
It is not political at all. They don't have like a CEO position, and then they don't look at it and say like, how can we piss off the local Singaporeans the most here, right? Right? What country other than Singapore can we pick from today? I'm pretty sure, like I'm almost 99% sure that their HR department doesn't include this in like when they're evaluating who their next CEO, who their next executive will be, right? I'm pretty sure from their standpoint, it's purely business perspective. They're looking at the qualifications, I don't know what projects they've done, how much value they can bring to the company, and like and I'm pretty sure they also will consider or have evaluated like local candidates as well. It's just that maybe in their marketing or whatever, not all of them are mentioned by name lah, and so all of the spotlight only goes on the what was it, Gupta?
Yep, Piyush Gupta.
Piyush Gupta, yeah. All the spotlight goes on just on Piyush Gupta, who was eventually selected. Yeah. So I think it's those, that at least that to me is the two issues going on here lah. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I followed this with great interest, because, as you know, I'm an Indian national, and currently public enemy number one. And I'm really curious about this conversation around true blue Singaporeans, because I feel, and this is my personal opinion, that I think Mr. Leong Mun Wai's sentiments, and which is reflective of his base, um, is about the anger that Singaporeans who've gone through the Singaporean way of life,
Mm.
who've kind of gone through the trenches, so to speak, are now not seeing the benefits at the end of the line. And it's like having to go through all of this only to see, you know, the finish line being taken over by someone who took a shortcut.
Yeah.
This has most of the time no basis in truth, but that is the optics of it.
Yeah.
So does True Blue Singaporean actually mean that you must go through the trenches and have some sort of shared misery, if you will?
I think it is easier to endear yourself to a true blue Singaporean if you have done those things. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have a colleague who's like, say, white, right? But then you learn that, oh, actually, he's been through army. You're like, oh, yeah, I can relate to you better than
Right.
if you just came, to work or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So, if I may ask, is one of the cornerstones of being a true Singaporean is to suffer the common suffering? Like, maybe that's not the right word, but
I mean, in a sense,
Okay.
because like what we're essentially talking about is like tribalism here, right? And it's easier to relate to someone who's like on the level with you than someone who's like, I'm pretty sure like most Singaporeans will find it difficult to relate to Lee Hsien Loong just because his
Right.
world is so much more different than like the average Singaporean, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's not just about like nationality or whatever. It's about like your common experience and so on. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So, at the same time, I think there's also a lot of pride when it comes to Singaporeans who are overachievers or who are like rich and famous. So I wonder if there are concessions given to new citizens, but who are celebrities or just like famous people that you can take pride in.
Right. I mean, I mean, I, I don't know if there are, maybe. But I think on that point, I I believe that at least in my opinion, Singapore, the government is placed in a very tricky position when it comes to trying to balance like the demographics, and with like immigration. How many people do they take in? How many people do they naturalize? Do they give citizenship to? Because like it's not because how to say, it's been out in the open for a number of years now that our birth rate is declining.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it is not like the replacement rate of 2. In fact, it's far below 2. So at the current rate that we are going, the population, if we don't accept any foreigners at all, we'll be like dying out. Our population will be declining. So yeah, although Singaporean might seem very, very overpopulated, there is a reason for that, and that is to keep the sort of like the population going. Otherwise, we'll get into the situation whereby Japan is now facing, whereby the mean or the sort of like the bell curve of the age is slowly shifting to the right side, and like your average age is like 30, 40, 50 plus, which is very, very scary because then, your economy suffers and it's made up of mostly older people. Yeah. Yeah, so it is reasonable from at least a political standpoint or from an economical standpoint why they want to like constantly bring in foreigners, especially professionals or those that can really add value or maybe create jobs or what have you, or innovate or whatever in Singapore, right? Because this not only means that there is a greater pool to sort of like sustain our reproduction rate, but also means that future Singaporeans might have better prospects, in the future, right? So if Singapore, for example, weren't so accepting of like MNCs or foreigners, we might not have tech companies. We might not have, your big MNC banks or whatever. We might not have big companies in Singapore. Then the many career prospects of the younger population might be looking a lot bleaker, lah. So it is a very trade-off kind of thing. And then for the government as well, they have to maintain this phase of like, On the one hand, they have to take the concern of like the average Singaporean very seriously, right? It's like, you know, although we want to like bring in, foreign talent and like innovation from outside and stuff like that, so as to boost our economy, keep it strong and going for many, many years, we have to take their concern seriously that we might be shown to be showing favor to the outsiders rather than our own locals, which of course looks very bad for like a government, yeah. But on the other hand, they have to balance like the health of the country and its longevity going forward. So it's a very, very tricky position. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't envy the government at all. I mean, on top of having to deal with, the medical crisis that we're going through right now, there's also all of
Escalating
these
medical crisis.
Yeah, and I think there's all of these other associated, societal issues that also need to be addressed and also quickly.
Yeah.
So it's like if they're not putting out statements quick enough, people just tend to fill in the blanks with whatever they feel like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the government has also consistently pushed the idea that this is for the economic well-being of the country. There is an economic angle to it. And this, of course, gets a lot of resistance from a significant chunk of folks, right? In that, like, the influx of new citizens are kind of a political strategy to hold on to power. And, so there's enough articles out there kind of matching up the number of birth rates to when they become voter age. And, there's a perception that new citizens are brought in because they are more likely to vote for the status.
Establishment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So is there any credence to that in your opinion?
I don't know. I can't say. I don't know. Honestly, this to me seems like, there's conspiracy theory and then there's tinfoil hat. This seems to me like tinfoil hat because it seems very like almost 5D chess kind of thing to do. It's like a very out there thing to plan for, because it's not like a very immediate thing that you think about, right? For example, like the official who's like in charge of like the immigration numbers and stuff, he doesn't put the numbers in a spreadsheet and go, okay, we need this so that in like the next election we have enough to maintain this seat, right? Because that would be crazy if he actually does that. Yeah, and that's what I mean by it's like a far out conspiracy theory. But I don't know, who knows? It might be. Yeah, but the thing with I guess the why Singapore is in this position, why the government is in this position, because like the way they decide to run, right? They are very sort of like, I call it like a very patriarchal way of running the country, in the sense that everything they do and like the policies they set, it's very much like a dad telling the kid like, this is good for you, this is bad for you. I remember, for example, with regard to like smoking and like tobacco tax, right? So I remember one year in one of the budgets, right? So every year we have like, Singapore has like the budgets, and then for each new thing on each whatever, they'll make like, they'll give like rationalization to sort of like explain, right? So that, the wider population can understand why they made these sort of changes. But then I remember this one year, they increased the tobacco tax, right, by like 2% or something. And then they didn't give any rationalization for it. They just said, okay, this is going to go up, this is it. And then move on to the next item.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's what I mean by like, it's a very sort of like, but not say patriarchal, paternal way of like governing. Yeah.
Right. It's like, we know best.
We know best and so on.
Right.
But at the same time, I think what Singapore is coming, or at least the Singapore government is coming to terms with, is that the citizens are starting to grow up.
Yeah.
We are not like kids who will just listen and do whatever is told anymore. We have our own opinions as well on how this country and how the future should be best run, especially when it comes to things like global warming, environment. I'm pretty sure the government has listened to those as well and made efforts towards that. And so now they're in this sort of like, I guess, a bit of a pickle, a tricky situation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, apologies for taking like having a very long political discussion, which was...
Oh, no worries. I'm less than qualified to be talking about this, but sure, if you want to discuss this, sure.
Me even less. But no, it is an interesting understanding of the situation regardless. I do want to go back to the topic of Singaporean identity and what it means to be Singaporean.
Yeah.
Now this may be a bit of a controversial ask, but if you were to give a cheat sheet to a foreigner, to essentially not be highlighted as a new Singaporean, what?
Not be highlighted as a new Singaporean. Okay. Okay, so I would say it's this is almost impossible to do for certain people, because I would say that there are certain immutable factors that, at least on surface, deem you to be a new Singaporean or an outsider almost immediately. So these are things like skin color, name, appearance, or whatnot, right? There is, there's a certain image in mind, or a certain view that Singaporeans have towards what a Singaporean should look like, or at least what they think a Singaporean looks like. So you have your Chinese, Indian, Malay, and so on, right? So, if you have a white friend who says that he's Singaporean, it's a little bit hard to believe at first, or at least it comes at a surprise, right? And I would say it's impossible to eliminate this barrier, or at least this on surface surprise factor, because you can't change those factors about yourself. I mean, you can change your name, sure, but you can't change, your skin tone or the way you look or whatnot, right? Yeah. So, but then, if you wanna endear yourself to locals, or if you wanna label yourself as a true blue Singaporean, make the extra effort to do all the things that I mentioned earlier on in this episode about what a Singaporean, what are the cultural markers of a true blue Singaporean. So you eat, I guess, local hawker food, you speak Singlish, you watch local sitcoms, or at least you are familiar with local sitcoms and our famous cultural characters like Mr. Kiasu or whatnot. And yeah, I would say that pretty much makes you Singaporean. And if you have a son, you send the son to NS.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, when you think when you mention this, right? There are I can actually think of a few foreigners who endear themselves to the local culture through actions which might not immediately seem Singaporean at first. So the first example I'm thinking of is Botak Jones, right? Very famous restaurant, hawker store operator, been around for many, many years. Pretty much treated as a local already because he's been around for so long, right? Everyone, locals love him, right? The other person that I'm thinking of is this, I believe it was a few years back. There was this person, I can't remember if he was Slovakian or Slovenian, but basically, maybe it was Eastern European or something. But basically what he did was that he started to organize, I think it was like roadside cleanups or beach cleanups or something to do with cleaning up Singapore. And he was very vocal about it on Facebook, and he gathered volunteer numbers in the hundreds or thousands, And it's and it's I'm pretty sure no one had an issue with him being Singaporean or not. They just loved the fact that he was doing something good for the country, lah. Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, there might be other ways for foreigner to endear yourself to the wider public. I don't know. Yeah.
Providing value, always a good way to show that you care.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I do have maybe a counterpoint.
Yeah.
And this is probably hypothetical here, but if I were to, eat local food, if I were to, I do all these things, just put it out there. If I were to, do all of these things, with respect to identifying with and, appreciating local culture, but at the same time, if I were living a privileged and affluent life, would all of these things that I'm doing matter?
Well, it depends on how you live that life, right? If you're driving around in a Rolls Royce, parking in a HDB car park, you're giving, I guess, people ammunition.
Yeah.
You're giving people a reason to hate you or something. Yeah, and I guess if like you treat, people wrongly or whatever. I mean, recently there was like these two Singaporean ladies. They were like rude to like a security
Yeah.
guard, right?
Yeah.
They were like bashing her for saying how poor she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they were Singaporean, right? But people hated them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's if you rub your class in other people's faces,
Yeah,
it never goes down well.
Yeah, I mean at that point it's not a local versus foreigner issue anymore. It becomes like an elitism issue, which is like a separate thing already. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that. I mean, I think I've always struggled with trying to separate, class issues from more, cultural and societal, boundaries. So, don't be a dick.
Yeah, pretty much.
And try not to be one of those, rich hype beasts on Instagram. And I think you should be good. Okay, good to know. Good to know. I think we have covered a fair bit of ground around Singaporean identity and what it means to be Singaporean.
Yeah. So actually, I think in the questions that you sent over, right, you raised one of the questions you asked was about like, I think the foreign athletes and their treatment by the locals.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time speaking about that.
Yeah.
Because I think in your question it was like, you're talking about the difference that say a local born athlete, the treatment that they get versus like how a foreign born athlete, the treatment that they get, right?
Yeah.
And how it's viewed differently. One is viewed as like, oh, this is our true blue Singaporean boy. The other is like, oh, they're just they're mercenaries basically. I actually think the opposite is true. Or not saying the opposite, but I don't think the foreigners have it as bad as you think in terms of like the way they're being perceived by the wider public. So for example, and the funny thing, right, is that Joseph Schooling, although he was born and raised in Singapore, the reason why he's so good is because he was trained in America. Right? So the irony is there. But so in terms of like, for example, the foreigner who's representing Singapore, competing for like Olympics and stuff like that. The specific example I'm thinking of is Li Jiawei and Feng Tianyu in, I believe it was 2008 or 2012 Olympics, right? So they were, of course, born in China. They were trained in China, but they became Singaporean to represent Singapore in table tennis. And back in 2008, I was still in school. I remember very clearly that the fever and the hype around like, Singapore competing and them competing for us in like the medal positions was like insane. So I was in school, right, and we have these TVs all over. Like literally when those matches were going on, everyone was like, the classes stopped, everyone went outside to go and watch, to go and cheer like Li Jiawei and Feng Tianyi as they competed for medals and stuff, So it's like, I'm pretty sure at that point no one thought of them as like, oh yeah, they're foreigner. I mean, maybe one or two naysayers out there, but everyone was like, yeah, they're proud to have them represent Singapore because Singapore is on the main stage lah. Yeah, but then, if you want to talk about like true blue Singaporean, like really, really all of the way one, I think the best example, although I may not be 100% sure on this, is Ip Pin Chu, the Paralympian. Yeah, she's been killing it, winning gold and stuff like that, and she's like as Singaporean as you can get. Yeah. So I think if you want to make like a model example of like a true blue Singaporean who gets like the attention and love that she deserves, she would definitely be it. And she's actually an NMP as well, former NMP as well.
Oh, so, is she?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which
okay,
is
this one
insane.
I didn't know.
So it's like she is like Singaporean in like so many levels,
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
That's like double whammies there.
Yeah.
Like crushing it in Parliament just as she does in the Olympics. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
God damn.
Yeah.
No, well done. No, thanks for bringing up that. I completely forgot about that issue.
Yeah.
Maybe if I could like expand on that a little. So about Li Jiawei, right? She and she's talked about this, like even though she's born in China and stuff, she's been extremely proud of representing Singapore, and like she considers that home, and I think that goes a long way in endearing herself to the local population, right? At the same time, there have been cases of other athletes from China who since moved back to China, and say I forget whose name it is, but um, it's like, oh, I've never considered Singapore home, and that really riles up a lot of people, right?
Mm.
So, and the specific criticism about the whole foreign sports talent scheme, essentially, which is that the government is trying not to cultivate local talent, but would rather just take the shortcut and buy them outright.
Yeah.
Do you think that the sports program is the reason why this whole True Blue versus New Singaporean thing came to be?
No, I don't. I mean, maybe it plays a bit of a factor, but I don't think that's the only reason. Like, for example, you look at Singapore football, right? It's quite hilarious how like almost half the team are like not local born.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I believe like the striker is like Eastern European or something by birth or something like that.
I see.
Yeah. So and then one of our fullbacks is like English or something or something like that. I don't know. I haven't been following local football for like the longest time.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it plays a part, but I don't think that's the only reason. Yeah. So again, going back, there are many other factors as well, and I guess media also plays a part when they, highlight how the Dyson CEO bought like a $200 million
Yeah.
penthouse or something, and all these kind of things. It just triggers local Singaporeans in a way, lah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where the resentment and these things come from. Yeah.
I think that there's the other thing also where so the recent example that I was looking at was the case of Eduardo Saverin.
Ah.
So the Facebook co-founder, and so he moved to Singapore in 2009.
Yeah.
And of course, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of flack that he got in the US too, saying that he was renouncing his US citizenship because of tax reasons, evading all that stuff. And then his wife is local Singaporean, and at least if I were to quote the South China Morning Post last month, they did say that Saverin is now a Singaporean citizen. So, does he get flack, for being a Singaporean, even though we can safely assume that he hasn't probably been overt about appreciating culture and stuff?
I mean, I don't know, because I don't follow him that much.
Okay.
I don't think he's very public as well.
He's not.
Yeah, but I mean, if we were to guess, it's like he's mainly involved with his own entrepreneurial ventures in tech and whatnot. So I'm guessing he is to some extent contributing to the local economy. But as I said before, he's not pissing anyone off. I don't see a reason why anyone should have an issue with him.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Until he starts buying the next GCB, and then afterwards,
maybe, or maybe some guys will complain because they stole one of our girls or something like that. Right?
Okay, this we have to talk about. This we have to talk about. All right. No, I mean, I'd like to. Okay, before I wrap this, I need to talk about.
Wait, I'm kidding. By the way, I wasn't serious about this. But this is just a sentiment that I've seen before. Yeah.
As a foreigner with a local partner, I hear this so much, it's not even funny.
Oh wait, do you get a lot of flack on this?
Well, so it's kind of like it's not in a malicious way. Once again, this is not like based on the sentiments that I see online.
Right.
But there is a general, sentiment that I see, especially among friends or people who, find out that my, wife is Singaporean. And, the reactions range anything from like, oh, your wife is Singaporean? And then they would just do an exaggerated thumbs up. It's like, yeah, man, you have moved up in life.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then like on the other end where people would go like, oh, of course, Singaporean girls prefer foreigners over local men.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
so that kind of leans into the whole victimhood narrative. And let's talk about this. Now, this notion is very commonly held, and I think there is a pattern here somewhere, and is is there a lot of anger towards, foreigners, new citizens, what have you, because of this? Because of this, they're stealing our jobs, they're stealing our women. Like, what do you think?
No, I find it quite a bit hilarious actually, because it's like I think the root of it is very incel driven in a way, whereby they are frustrated that they are not able to, find success in a dating pool or whatnot. And so when they see foreigners are able to have more success than them, then they get angry lah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they don't just get angry at the foreigners, by the way. They get angry at the women as well.
Yeah.
Almost, or like the person who decides to date a foreigner. There's almost like a stereotype whereby, oh man, in these like obscure forums, the EDMW or whatever, they have a term. They call it like what, the sinky girls or whatever. They only go for like the foreigners or whatnot. Yeah. So they speak about it very derisively over there. But then again, this is a very subpopulation, subculture of Singapore lah. I don't think it's representative of like Singaporean men as a whole. It's a very small subset of them. But yeah.
Yeah, it's so there's the whole, SPG thing, there's the
Yeah.
whole,
Sound particle.
AMDK
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
And this is just constantly
Would you care to
peddled.
explain these abbreviations?
So SPG, so this is based on my understanding after years of lurking on EDMW.
Based on Windows research.
So SPG is short for Sarong Party Girl. It's essentially applied to women who tend to have a preference for white men. There's a very commonly held belief among a fair number of Singaporean men who feel like women prefer white men over themselves, over local men. And then you have AMDK, which is Ang Mo Doaki, which is Hokkien for white man, big stick. And with all the sexual innuendo that comes up with. And so the idea is that, essentially the white man has the bigger dick and therefore the better job, gets all the women, yada, yada, yada. So, and these are just constantly talked about in these forums. And while these are, fringe communities and these are like held by a small subset of people, I think it is affecting, folks in regular life. There's a friend of mine, she's Singaporean. Her partner is white. But because I know her, I know that it's not, a fetish or anything, which is what everybody tends to assume. I've known her for a while. I know that, she also had to do a lot of, she once confided that she would constantly second guess herself and question herself as to whether her choice in partner was influenced by, these things. Is it a racial fetish? Is it some sort of, preference? And then over time, she's come to terms with the fact that I'm with this guy because I like him. And, the incels on these forums can say whatever the they want. But, I think enough people are talking about it, enough people feel this, and I think enough women are trying to defend their, dating preferences. And I'd hate it if my wife were to have to do that among her friends.
Yeah.
It's just, it's almost demeaning. And I think this is more of an interracial relationship conversation, but, that there is a sense that anytime people learn about our interracial relationship, it's often looked at through the lens of, a fetish. It's like, oh, it must be because he likes Chinese girls. Or in her case, oh, it must be because, she has a fetish for Indian men. And they never look at the simplest reason, which is because we liked each other. We decided to see how things went and, ended up being together. But, yeah, look, this is probably like, I think a topic for another time. There's like a whole lot to unpack. But no, I'm glad that we brought this up. I'm glad that you brought this up, Danny. And I think it's a very important aspect of like Singaporean identity, because at the end of the day, and as long as you find the one who's right for you, that's all that matters, right? And especially living in a multicultural, multiracial society, these things are going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Danny, so do you have any last words on the topic of Singaporean identity?
I guess to foreigners or to PR or to people who feel like they get a lot of mistreatment or something, or they don't feel like they belong even though they've been living here for a number of years. I don't know, just try to take. I mean, I want to say like don't think about it, don't stress too much about it. But then it seems a little bit, because other people might have it a lot more difficult than I do, so it might be a little bit insensitive to say. But at the same time, I think there's some general things like don't shit the bed, don't piss people off. I think those are really good general rules to apply anywhere you live. In terms of not pissing off the local population, not triggering the tribalism and whatnot. And yeah, I think if you are nice to locals, they will be nice to you. Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Danny. And once again, thanks so much for having this conversation with me.
Sure.
All right, folks, that was Danny Koordi. Thanks so much, man, for being here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode about Singaporean identity and the various complexities that come with trying to define what it is. This is, of course, the second episode of the series coming together in collaboration with Whitehatters.sg. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and any other podcast platform of your choice. And we'll also be on YouTube, so check it out. This is we will be doing a couple more episodes over the course of the next couple of weeks, so do look forward to a new episode dropping every week, where we'll talk about various facets around Singapore, society, cultural norms, and of course some very controversial topics. So I hope you guys stick around for more. My name is Rindo, and you are listening to Coming Together. Bye bye.